everyone, and welcome to the very first Simply Cyber Lunch and Learn. I'm Gerald Auger, and I'm incredibly excited to kick off this new monthly series where we'll be bringing you practical, hands-on cybersecurity training that you can immediately apply to your career. Every month, we'll be hosting a live 1-hour session with industry experts who will share their knowledge, experience, and practical skills that you can take back to your workplace right after lunch. Think of it as a monthly power-up session, learning while you lunch. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce our first instructor, someone many of you might already know from the Simply Cyber community, Steve McMichael. Now, Steve has been making waves with his popular blog, CPA to Cybersecurity, where he shares his unique journey and insights transitioning from accounting to cybersecurity. His perspectives on GRC and risk management has helped countless professionals navigate their own career path. Now, Steve's going to deep dive into one of the most important frameworks in our industry and my personal favorite, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And trust me, couldn't ask for a better guide. He'll be breaking down risk management fundamentals, walking us through the framework's core components, and showing you exactly how to apply this knowledge to jumpstart your GRC career. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go get Steve and get cracking, get your lunch, and let's get ready to.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. Can you just let me know in chat if you can see me and hear me okay, please? I can see the chat. Unless I see otherwise, I'll assume we're rolling. Thanks so much. I love talking about today's topic, risk management and NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And the reason is because of two barriers these concepts have helped me with to remove. And I think it can do the same for you as well. So number one, if you want to talk about finding a path to break into cybersecurity from the outside, I think this content is going to be helpful. And number two, if you want to improve risk management communication to drive cyber risk reduction in your business with your business stakeholders, we'll certainly have applicable material here today. So I'll zoom into the slides. I'll check the chat and make sure we're rolling. I can see and hear you. Thank you for that. And let's get started. I mentioned that there is a link to the content I'm going to be going through in a YouTube description. And also if you're on LinkedIn, it's as a comment to the LinkedIn event. So check that out. YouTube has the great chat experience, so I do recommend it. And I'm going to switch to the slide view and we'll get rolling. All right, so risk management fundamentals. And actually start off with a little bit about me. So if we're meeting for the first time, I'm Steve McMichael, and I'm an instructor in the Simply Cyber Academy. And I love being associated with the Simply Cyber community. It's it's really great to be here. If you're part of the community as well, drop a hashtag TeamSC in the comments to say hi and to leave an audit trail for your CPE tracking. I've got a business background. I've got some certs. I work in tech as the director of GRC at a software company. Views expressed are my own. And when we get together on this channel, it's to advance the Simply Cyber mission and values, to guide people through their cybersecurity career journey with authentic, accessible education and community support. And always with the values of being inclusive, supportive, and collaborative. So that's the preamble. Let's get right into the content. I told you there were some barriers this content can help you remove. And the first one is finding a path to break into cybersecurity. So that's a really important topic near and dear to my heart. It's frankly why I'm here. And it's because early in my career, when I wanted to break in, I was told that I couldn't because I missed the boat. I didn't have a computer science degree or a technical diploma. And the mentors I was getting this advice from, they weren't trying to be mean, right? It was just kind of a matter of fact way of explaining, that's how things are. But later, it was actually more than a decade later, I met people like Dr. Auger and Sean Nunley here from Cloud Security Office Hours, industry veterans, and you meet them too, people that have helped a lot of people in cyber, and they come back and they get some wisdom and they pass it along. And for example, from Sean here, the wisdom is so many people thought they didn't fit, and then they found that their skills fit in cybersecurity. And that's certainly my story, and we see it in Simply Cyber, and we all want to amplify that for others. And then another one here is audit is a wonderful place to start in cybersecurity, right? So that's the C for compliance in GRC. And you can start there whether you're super technical or you're not. You just need a continuous learning mindset, and you can get there. And GRC is a great place to break in. So, if the career topic is of interest to you, you can smash the links on this blog post or this, set of free training I've lined up in terms of ideas to break in based on my experience. But right now, I want to move to idea number 2, how CSF and leveling up your skills in risk management can improve an organization's risk management communication. So I love this picture here, figure 5, and we're going to talk more about it, but that's kind of what it's all about, is how can we, at the 30,000 foot view, the 10,000 and 1,000 foot view, how can everybody get aligned and be driving cyber risk reduction? CSF helps with that a lot, and being risk focused helps with that a lot. And the quote is, for me, NIST Cybersecurity Framework is the best approach to security operations and the ability to build an information system, an information security program in the world right now. So if that's coming from Dr. Auger, he knows a lot of stuff. It's probably, he's onto something. But the big quote that really helped me in my career and almost kind of floored me and knocked me off my feet with it being unexpected and impactful and being valuable is this one right here. So it's not just about the controls in the framework. It's the approach to laying them out. ISO 27000 just pukes out a bunch of controls, and in my opinion, there's no logical grouping of it. I mean, they have some, but it's not great. But with NIST Cybersecurity Framework, it's basically written for practitioners in the context of how an information security program should work. So this is what I was looking for. I was looking for that generally accepted accounting principles, and CSF truly does a great job organizing security outcomes left and right of boom. We're not just about protection up front before a security incident. We want to be able to quickly detect, respond, and recover and be resilient. And another cool thing here is that cyber is kind of insanely big and complicated, right? The domains are each professions in themselves. But guess what? With NIST, they distilled all that complexity down into just 6 things, keeping it simple, but also allowing it to expand out into more complex areas. All right. So the agenda here, I noted it's a little bit aggressive, but we'll see how we'll go. And if we get interrupted or run out of time today, you can always catch me on Discord and we can unpack this more. And you have the content at your fingertips now that you can go through at your own speed. So we're going to talk about risk. We're going to talk about CSF and drill into it a little bit. I'll take a quick beat here and check in chat, make sure everything's going okay. All right. All good. Ready to learn? Nice. Okay, so nobody's saying I've got audio issues, so I'll keep rolling. I will break a few times for questions as we get through. So we're going to start off with risk management. You might have heard it's the heart and center of GRC. It's been called the golden task or the superpower that you can wield to make an outsized impact. Does anybody in chat know why risk is so important and why it's crucial to begin with before we dive into CSF? I'll keep an eye on the chat here. I know there's a 20-second delay. I'll keep rolling and I'll keep an eye out. So the answer is, and it might be just delayed in arriving, we'll see, is that it's about prioritization, right? And a cool thing about your vantage point in GRC and doing risk work is you get breadth, okay? So you get a broad view of risk across a company. Normally that's reserved to executives and to, external auditors maybe. But when everyone else is focused on their swim lane and their specialized function, you're in a unique position to help the business prioritize where to focus, which can help it to reliably achieve objectives. All right. And I see a few chats coming in. We're going to get the handouts, link in the description. Risk can lead to loss of profit, reputation, and other negative issues. Exactly, right? Like we're tying our security work to our ability to reliably achieve objectives. And we want to de-risk it so we do reliably achieve them. Business strategy, exactly. Business-wide issue, of course. Awesome. All right. And in both accounting and cybersecurity, when we do control testing or control work, they use this concept called a risk-based approach, right? We want to ensure that any controls we put in place are right-sized to the risk. Or put another way, make sure you get the problem statement correct first, right? Before you spend money and time and resources on it. Understand the risk. There are lots of terms and acronyms in risk management. And if you've done Security Plus, or maybe you've been to Slay Security Plus with Jesse Johnson, that is awesome. You'll know these terms already. But if you haven't, that's fine too, right? We're meeting where you are. That's why we're in the workshop today, helping you understand the language and the skills and the terms to have meaningful conversations to advance cyber risk reduction. So we'll go into those a bit. And I want to start off with a scenario. So let's have the rubber hit the road before we do the alphabet soup of definitions. Let's just talk to Uncle Carl at a barbecue, okay? So let's say we're at a family event and we run into Uncle Carl and he's talking about how, someone brought up password keepers and MFA and he just said, I can't be bothered to do those things because I've got nothing to hide. I'm not worried if someone gets into my email. I've got all sorts of other priorities, 99 things that are important and urgent problems to deal with. I don't really want to hear about password keepers and MFA. I'm just going to let it go and I'm going to sleep fine. I accept the risk. So if you want to help Uncle Carl here, you might say, hey, man, something that a lot of people don't realize initially is that their online banking sends password reset emails to their personal email accounts. So you say you have nothing to hide and you're not worried if someone gets into your personal email, but it's actually a juicy target for criminals that want to steal your money. And it's not that they're interested in your emails, right? It's not that you are particularly interesting. It's that they want to pivot into your bank. And so another option you could consider here to protect your money would be avoidance. Just stop using email, right? Don't allow those password resets to go to your bank and you'd be safe from hackers. Of course, then you won't have email. And so perhaps another option you could try would be something else, maybe a transference strategy. The same way you buy insurance for your home and your car, why don't you just buy a cyber insurance policy, pay a premium every month, and then the event that you have an email compromise or lose some money or critical data, or maybe you lose your identity, you could get a payout back from that insurance company to help offset some of the cost of the cleanup. Of course, unlike a car, you can't replace your identity once it's been stolen. It's out there in its permanent record. So I guess if you don't like that option, I'd be happy to tell you about how easy it is to get into staying safe online, including those things like, MFA and password keepers. Why don't I show you this, right? So that's just a microcosm example of what we do all the time in GRC on different risks and opportunities coming up in the business and how we want to have meaningful conversations about it and to apply risk concepts. All right. And so to do that, we need to, we touched on some threats and vulnerabilities in that example. We touched on trade-offs to different mitigations. That's the name of the game. And let's just unpack some basic terminology to be able to talk the language. So, a risk, start there. What is that? Well, it's the potential for loss, damage, or harm resulting from the occurrence of threats, exploiting vulnerabilities in digital systems or assets. So what? Well, it's grown in cyber risk to be a big deal now. It's getting a lot bigger, right? It can actually be an existential business risk. And as we all know, it's being talked about a lot more. Businesses need our help. That brings us to risk management. So what's that all about? Well, it's a systematic process, kind of like accounting. You identify, assess, prioritize, and mitigate potential risks to those digital systems, networks, and assets. So what? Well, we need guardrails and due diligence in place to be able to reliably achieve our objectives. And we're not here to be annoying and cause undue friction, and we're going to be balanced and reasonable. And consider here that the fastest cars have the best brakes, right? Like, I'm not here to get in your way and slow you down. I'm here to put brakes on your car so that you don't drive off the rails, right? And so you can win the race, right? It's actually about driving faster. That's the idea. And it's a life cycle. You'll hear lather, rinse, repeat as a Simply Cyber mantra. And I've got a little bit of a picture here I can walk you through on the phases and risk management. Just going to take a quick beat and see if there's any issues in the questions or burning questions. Everything's looking pretty good. I love the Carl shout out. Yeah. All right, great. So I've got a picture here to kind of wrap our heads around this life cycle, and then we'll go into each point. We start with identifying risks, right? And you can't do that sitting at your desk. Well, you can virtually, but you can't do it alone. You need to engage stakeholders. You got to talk to the business to know how to enable its strategy, to protect it and enable it. And you need to understand the risk appetite and tolerance we'll talk about, and you might do some documentation to show provable due diligence and due care. Risk assessment, there's different approaches, qualitative and quantitative, straight math, not so straight math. And we do some prioritization based on likelihood. How likely is this bad thing going to happen? Uncle Carl gets his email compromised. And impact. How much money is his bank account? All right. Phase 3, risk response planning. What are the strategies we're going to use to buy down the risk? Different options. And then you implement those. But the thing is, you can do a lot of security work and find out later from measuring that you actually didn't move the needle on cyber risk, right? So if that happens, you need to be really checking and monitoring and correcting course to ensure that everything is moving in the right direction. All right. So we can unpack those a little bit more. In risk identification, it's about identifying risk through various methods. Threat intelligence, like we get in the daily cyber threat briefing. Risk assessments could be one-offs. It could be maybe as an intake to the procurement process in your business. Hey, we're getting a new technology and plugging into our network, or we have a new tool that's going to be handling our critical data. How can we kind of assess that risk? And when we do that, we're talking to stakeholders. Well, who are they? Well, it's up and down the organization and left and right. And our role is as a translator between the business and the technical teams. And we use CSF later to help have that lexicon and language to enable effective communication. We also want to consider third parties in the context of our stakeholder group, because a lot of the times, we've got cloud services and third parties we're working with, and it's important to understand the shared responsibility model. So, not the same concept applies to Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud, that they are responsible for security of the cloud, the data center it resides in. You don't need security guards and Linnell badges and physical security when you are relying on AWS for a service. However, Salesforce is hosted in AWS, right? Let's say you're using Salesforce and you're the admin for it, in fact, and you make everybody an admin. Well, your security in the cloud of what you're protecting, maybe your customer data, is not going to be secure because you don't have least privilege access. And that's not something that your provider can do for you. It's your responsibility. All right. And we talk about risk appetite and tolerance. So at a bank, for example, they're going to have a low risk appetite. And here's their vault. Here's the bank on the left. Because they're regulated and because they're protecting money and maybe other stuff that's valuable and can be stolen. A startup, very different. They might not have that big pile of money or intellectual property or that high value asset that's being targeted, and so they're able to be more open concept. They basically have a higher risk tolerance and risk appetite because of the value of their assets, and also, I guess, the stage of their company's maturity. So it's not about having a right or wrong answer. It's about tailoring it effectively to the business you're helping. Related to that point, I won't drill into it, but there's some research from IANS on the size of a security team proportionate to its revenue. That's just one factor. And this cookie cutter example, it's kind of impossible to do across verticals, but it's just helpful to get our minds on right sizing security and risk treatments. We talked about these points, and now we'll get into risk assessments. So we talked to stakeholders, we've considered third parties, we have an understanding of identifying some risks, but now, how do we prioritize them? How do we know what to focus on? There's infinite cyber threats out there. So we want to consider quantitative approaches if we can, right? So the bigger the risk you're dealing with, and kind of maybe the more money you need to spend to mitigate it, the higher up you're going to have to go in management. And the higher up you go to make a decision in management, the more data you're going to need. Unfortunately, or however, oftentimes in considering cyber threats, it's hard to get good quantitative data. And so we need to also use qualitative approaches, and we'll show you a little bit about that. If you can put them together, you get a hybrid approach. And I like the terminology from Ryan Learvik here, who you might recognize from Cyberstarters. He's got a great book that I read before he was on Cyberstarters, okay? But the quantitative stuff is the straight math, and the qualitative stuff is the not so straight math, and we put them together. Now, so let's get through the quant, and then we'll get to the next piece. A couple of definitions here. So single loss expectancy. If we lose a web server, okay, and have a single loss of it, how much is it going to cost? And what is or the potential financial loss? Yeah, that's right. And then the asset value is how much is that asset worth if it were to be, compromised or destroyed. Exposure factor is the percentage of loss that would occur if our asset was compromised. So I want to know, I'm risk assessing a web server. I want to know the single loss expectancy. I'm going to take its asset value and multiply it by an exposure factor. But that's just one point in time. I kind of need to plan for the whole year here, right? Because our budget is 12 months. And I can't just be going to finance asking as things happen for what I need. I'm trying to build a comprehensive program with that continuous cycle. And so we kind of annualize it, okay? So what is the annual rate of occurrence that we can multiply by a single loss? And now we're talking on an annual scale. So you might have seen questions like this before in entry-level cyber courses. So asset value of $100,000 for our web server, 60% chance it's going to get popped or be down. And because maybe there's some transaction processing on it, that cost of that, let's say it's a day of single loss expectancy, is $60,000. Annually, how often does it happen? Well, if it happens every 10 years, that's 0.3 times per year. And we could say the numbers changed a bit here, but the annual loss expectancy is $10,000. All right. So we'll keep moving into qualitative. And a super handy tool that's a great reference when you get here is NIST Special Publication 830, the Guide for Conducting Risk Assessments. Okay. And they provide, some framework and methodology to reference as you're trying to rate something. So I'm risk assessing that my web server could go down, right? And I want to know how likely that is, okay? So if I look at table G2, the likelihood that an adversary is going to take out my web server, if it's somewhat likely, we're in the moderate range, which is a very wide band in the 20 to 79% percentile of likelihood that it would happen. If it's very high that someone wants to take out our web server, that would mean that it's in the top 4% in terms of likelihood. It's probably almost certain or imminent. Accidents also happen though, right? You can have a cyber problem that's not due to a threat actor. Someone might kick the cord out of the wall of that web server, right? Or someone might turn it off or make a change and not realize the downstream impact that it had. If that happens to a web server 10 to 100 times a year, it's a high likelihood of occurrence. If it happens every 10 years, low likelihood, right? So now we have some sense of likelihood, and you put it together considering not just that it would happen, but that it would result in an adverse impact. Now we need to talk about impact, okay? So if that web server going down would have a serious adverse effect on our business, moderate impact. If it would have multiple severe catastrophic adverse effects and be in the top 4% of the things that could happen bad, the bad things that could happen to our company, it's a very high risk, right? So probably doesn't make sense for a web server, but isn't that nice when you start talking about, jockeying for resources and prioritizing where to focus and doing your work in GRC, that when someone calls something very high, you could pull this table out and say, oh, really? Like, are you saying that it's going to have multiple severe catastrophic consequences and it's in the top 4% of things that could go wrong? And then it just helps us all get on the same song sheet. All right. When you have your likelihood and impact, you put them together in table I2, level of impact from very low to very high, likelihood from very low to very high, and then the intersection is the risk. All right. And then a hybrid risk analysis. You can see like they're trying to get a little bit quantitative, right? Semi-quantitative in terms of talking about frequency per year and trying to give it a percentile range on the likelihood scale here. All right. Next, we'll get into risk response planning. So we know that our web server maybe is vulnerable and we want to figure out what to do about it. This is a slightly different example than the one with Uncle Carl in terms of approaches to take, right? So we can get out of the web server business and third-party host it, right? Kind of avoid the risk. Or we could just say, you know what, that transaction processing on that web server wasn't a big deal. Let's just stop doing it. Or we could say, you know what, let's, I guess this isn't for a web server, but if the context is maybe more employee related, we could have email gateways, MFA, educate end users, don't allow email into environments with legacy systems, right? Like if you have Windows XP on an MRI machine in a hospital, don't have email on that box, back up your data, encrypt your data. Our defense and depth of the controls are to mitigate, right? If you're going to accept, you know what, we can't do anything reasonably, we should accept the risk, sign here, press hard, and document that, and then transfer. One example I'll give you of transfer that isn't insurance would be like PCI DSS with credit card data. So you might consider credit card data toxic waste that you don't want to bring into your IT environment. Instead, because it would just take a high degree of care to be PCI DSS compliant and to have commensurate controls to that high risk. So what you can do is partner with a third party to do the credit card processing. They can have the secure or PCI DSS credit card suitable environment, and they just pass you an anonymized token, right? And now you just have an anonymized token in your IT environment, which is not toxic waste, which is kind of a way of sharing the risk and transferring the risk to a third party. All right, I'll take a quick beat for see if there's any questions, and then we'll get into risk mitigation. Some comments here on the importance of risk. Shout out to Carl. And got to segment and have those checks in place. Awesome, David Stewart. Thank you for that. All right, we'll keep moving. Risk mitigation. So a lot of risk being mitigated here. There's probably an email gateway, like all those things we just described. Let's talk more specifically about it. So we want some controls and safeguards, and they're not just blinky lights and software in the technical column. There's also measures or controls to reduce risk that are operational and managerial. So if we look here, right, there's a variety of different approaches we can use to reduce risk and reduce, in fact, the residual risk, which we're going to define shortly. We start with doing nothing. What is the likelihood and impact if our web server goes down? That's our inherent risk. We didn't do anything. But then we considered some technical, operational, and managerial controls, and we're left with the residual risk that is hopefully lower. So let me tell you a little bit more about what I mean. User authentication and authorization. So how do I know that this user identity is legitimate and not spoofing? And once I can trust that the user on my system is authenticated and it's actually them, are they authorized to see that classification of data? Is it, least privileged access? So that's two different things. Encryption, fascinating topic, going back to World War II or with the Enigma machine or going back to the Caesar cipher, and crazy stuff going on with quantum and other. That's a complex one, but an important consideration at rest and in transit. Patch management, we hear you got to patch it all the time in the daily cyber threat briefing. Data backups, please let me know in chat if you celebrate World Backup Day and your thoughts on following the 3-2-1 rule for backups. Endpoint protection and detection and response. So we can have these security agents on our endpoints that are helpful for security. Network firewalls, detecting us and preventing attacks in the network layer. And it could include an IDS and an IPS, feeding our SIM. So we get these irregularities and alerts going to a security operations center and into their SIM. And it can be from our network firewalls, IDS, IPS. It could be from authentication events. It can be from various points of detection to give a sense of the security and the detection of a security incident in our environment. And then moving into operational controls, asset management and change management. I mean, asset management is kind of a highly automated area. However, there's also a lot of work from humans needed here. Lifecycle stuff, right? That's a big deal. And change management, you can't just walk into the data center and pull a cable out of the rack, right? You need to follow change management, and that's a procedural piece that requires humans to follow the procedure. There's more here on BCP and DRP, but I think I'm just going to keep moving because of the volume of content to get through. Phase 5 risk monitoring review is about what I'd noted, that it's a continuous cycle, and we want to be checking that we plan to check act, right? The Deming cycle, to ensure that our controls are operating effectively and that risk is, calibrated in the right place. And change is the only constant, both inside your company and outside. And so we're constantly adapting to align our security program to those changes. So it's pretty important concept if you haven't heard about inherent and residual risk before. So inherent risk is the level of risk without any measures. It was before, right at the top. Who cares? Well, it's important and helpful to have a baseline of where we started so that we can kind of measure the value and return on security investment of the controls we implemented. And then residual risk is the risk currently after all of the selected controls have been implemented. And as I noted, the key here is to make sure that the residual risk does go down after you implement the controls. If not, what's going on, folks, right? Like you got to course correct if needed, which we covered. All right. I do want to talk about BIAs, which are an important piece of our risk assessment work. And a couple of cool things about it. Like one, there's a great template from NIST linked in the blog right here. Two, it's helpful to understand the processes that we're helping and how critical they are. It's going to be availability focused primarily. It might even be done in your IT department instead of in your security department. And so maybe it's less focused on confidentiality and integrity, but very focused on availability because IT uses them to make sure that they have the appropriate levels of uptime. However, it's a helpful artifact that we can use in our risk work. And I love that we're focusing on the business. Like we were just saying in chat, it's all about protecting and enabling the business, and connecting with BIAs is helpful. All right. And then one final thing is that it gets us into that difficult, important, but not urgent quadrant to do that preventative work that is going to be helpful later when the bad day happens. All right. Lots of terminology in BIAs. Recovery time objective. How long can the system be down? Recovery point objective. What duration do the backups need in terms of our ability to restore after an incident? With banking transactions, like if you lost records of money moving around, how many minutes or hours can you afford to lose and recreate? Okay. That's probably going to make risk tolerance and RPOs, risk tolerance low and RPOs low in a banking environment. But now we're getting into redundancy and buy two of everything, right? Or more. And that can be very expensive very quickly. So a difficult balancing act. Mean time to recover is the average time required to restore a failed system to its full functionality. So what? Well, it gives us a sense of how long it will take to restore a service, right, that we can consider in our business continuity plans. And then mean time between failures is a metric considering kind of the reliability of the system. How many times has it gone down and how quickly has it been restored after that outage? A longer mean time between failures indicates a more reliable system. All right. Single points of failure, you don't want those. So if you got your password keeper on your phone only and lose your phone, that's a bad day. And so we want to be looking for in the BIAs and in our risk assessment work, availability risk and avoiding single points of failure. Mission essential functions and critical systems, it's just prioritization is the name of the game. All right. Given that we're halfway through, I'm going to skip these detailed examples of critical systems, but you can have them here. And I'll get to financial analysis. So here, we want to assess the cost returns and financial performance of cybersecurity measures. Why? Because we're helping the business and we want to be speaking the language of business. So when it comes to purchasing hardware, software, hiring people, outsourcing services, we want to consider a total cost of ownership, which is not just the upfront cost, but the ongoing expense, including personnel training and maintenance, right? So, a classic example would be a data loss prevention tool. It's one thing to buy the tool. It's another thing to have an operator dealing with the deluge of additional alerts that it's going to produce. Return on assets. So that's something to consider. That's a common financial ratio, talking about the efficiency of our use of our assets, including our security tools. And return on investment is related to our financial benefits related to our costs. All right, so that's it for part one. I'm going to bounce over to part two, and I'll quickly check chat. Let me know if you have any questions while I move over there. Just be a second. All right. Checking out chat. One format is a single point of failure. Spreading across formats mitigates the risk. That's the very basics of it. Nice. If we were to consider a quantitative approach to be able to speak the language of executive and C-suites, where can we find good resources to start developing our quantitative strategy that can be utilized? Right. So, Dr. Auger has talked about the FAIR method. I showed that book by Ryan Learvik, and let's chat more about it. That can be a big topic and a good one. So we'll put a pin to get back to that one. Thank you. All right. So you can see now part 2. Finally, we're getting into NIST. Okay. And I think what I want to emphasize in this section is the characteristics of the framework. So this thing is voluntary, flexible, and adaptive. It focuses on risk instead of technical controls. It's not prescriptive. And it also focuses on risk instead of compliance requirements because it's voluntary. It facilitates communication and collaboration, which is my favorite thing about it. And it's changing and evolving, right? We're on to version 2. So it's helpful to, I guess, start with the definition of what the thing is. So NIST Cybersecurity Framework is a set of guidelines, best practices, and standards developed by the United States government to help organizations manage and improve their cyber risk management processes. Top 3 things to know as we're just getting started with our immersion in it. Number 1, it's designed to help businesses and organizations of all sizes. So it started in the government, but it was made for critical infrastructure, and then it kind of cascaded out into commercial industry because it's just so helpful. And it wants to help them reduce their cyber risk and protect their information systems and the data they contain. It helps provide a common language and systematic methodology for managing cyber risk and enhancing cyber resilience. That was the quote about vomit, okay, from Dr. Auger, in terms of a helpful language and methodology. And it's based on the input of experts in private industry, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. It wasn't just written by the government for the government. It was actually written by people in industry. So this is a really interesting handout from on NIST.gov, right? That they have a 1-pager, a small and medium business quick start guide to kickstart your cyber risk management strategy if you have a modest or no cybersecurity plans. And I mean, you could use this at a dental office very effectively. And it's a little bit wild to think of, 3 million people in the government, 16 sectors of critical infrastructure and those businesses, and then all sorts of commercial industry down to a dental office that would benefit from this. And what's cool is its ability to scale and tailor that you'll see a little bit more. I won't go into too much detail talking about the origin story and the development and the regulations here, but you do have the content on the page, and I'm happy to talk, after this live workshop. So, but it all started in 2013 with an executive order, 13636, a very compelling mission to enhance security and resilience of critical infrastructure, acknowledging that it's not in the government, it's not in the federal networks, it can't be protected by the government. It's right. It needs to be, but it's important as well, and it needs due care, due diligence, and it needs all of us to help, drive cyber risk reduction. And there's growing threats to critical infrastructure, and we need to collaborate in this team sport and this private-public partnership. And then a year later, we got version 1.0. Wasn't called NIST Cybersecurity Framework. It was called the Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. My favorite thing about this title is that it makes cybersecurity one word, and there's no capital S in the middle. So, I mean, already tons of value from standardizing on that. It was created by NIST, but the primary authors were practitioners in industry, multiple organizations. They identified other existing standards, guidelines, and frameworks. So I recently saw a webinar where they talked about how, NIST even admits that they borrowed from other standards and guidelines. And I think they just took them and put them into a bag and shook them up and dumped out the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. But that has not been my experience. I'd looked at a lot of alphabet soups, and I really found the most value, and I just felt a sense of relief and clarity and focus with having the CSF as the overlay to them. And if that works for you, great. If it doesn't, that's fine too, but I'm just sharing my perspective here. All right. And then in April 2018, there was a version 1.1, and the key changes were a new self-assessment section and ratcheting up the focus on supply chain risk management, which they did again in 2.0. So here's 2.0 recently, like last year, February 2024. getting a chef's kiss endorsement from Dr. Auger, so it's got to be good because he knows his stuff. And you can see his content on that. I like how they removed the critical infrastructure focus, right? They made it applicable to all organizations. NIST Cybersecurity Framework doesn't say critical infrastructure in there. You can use it too if you're not in critical infrastructure. It added a sixth function called govern to highlight the importance of governance. And it increased cyber supply chain again, as I mentioned. And it worked on the categorization and the kind of the language of communicating security outcomes up and down and left and right in an organization. All right. And now the key section here when we look at executive orders and regulations is that it's been influential on the world stage, okay? Not only was it a product of regulation, but you can see that it has been adopted and been considered in other executive orders and regulations, right? So there's a Cybersecurity Enhancement Act. CSF played a significant role in it. FISMA in 2014 emphasized the adoption of industry standards, including the CSF, right? If you want to show in a court of law and public opinion that you've shown a comprehensive cybersecurity program, if you say it's aligned to this cybersecurity framework, that's one indicator that it could be comprehensive. The Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015, CSF played a complementary role, more executive orders, and that's basically the key takeaway here is that it's recognized on the world stage. It's been shaped by various executive orders and has also shaped them. Okay? So now is my favorite part, the applicability of the cybersecurity framework. Let's talk about why we need this thing, right? So the bottom line is cybersecurity risk continues to increase and cybersecurity risk is growing in cost. Because of these drivers, we need CSF, and it's going to help with the pain of those issues. But why is cybersecurity risk increasing? To unpack that, we can start with Dr. Ron Ross, who was on the Simply Cyber Fireside Chats. I think he just recently retired, but a great piece of wisdom here. The greatest threat that faces any of us today is the threat of complexity. Trillions of lines of code in billions of devices with ubiquitous connectivity across the globe. That is a large exposed attack surface, and it can impact a lot of people. And his points about technology being complicated and everywhere are in my top 10 list of reasons why cybersecurity is hard. So CSF makes cybersecurity easier, and let's contrast that with 10 reasons why it's hard. So I'll pop up in this blog. All right, so technology is everywhere. We kind of touched on that, but let's add on to it. Every company is a software company. We have a daisy chain of sensors and servers and endpoints on the edge and in the cloud. Attack surface is big and growing. Scope is big. Technology is inherently flawed. We've got 200,000 vulnerabilities in software since 1988 that have been reported according to this one view here, and many are undiscovered O days. And of course, we've got DJ BSEC's EPSS tool, right? We're hearing about flaws in software all the time. Technology is rarely secure by default. Just take a look at guidance from the NSA to not trust your ISP-provided modem router. Technology is complicated. There are 3,500 security vendors and an eye chart of them. There's the fan with layers of defense in depth in the different layers. And here's another one. Cyber is a dynamic threat, not static. So like, unlike fire, which used to be a big problem, at least it's static, right? It always just wants fuel, heat, and oxygen. Cyber is an arms race between attackers and defenders. And so more of a dynamic race and competition to stay on top of. Another one is this is a silent killer. So if your car gets stolen, you kind of know because your car is gone. And maybe you see some smashed, some broken glass where the window is smashed. If someone is in your email account, you might not know that, right? That dwell time, that they're passively there and not leaving traces, or maybe you don't detect it. And the impact's going to come to you in a more of a stealth way, which is a bigger challenge. Number 7 is that the economics are driving more actors and capability. The numbers have been disputed since this came out in terms of trillions, but whether it's trillions or billions or what number of zeros, I think everyone's agreed that it's a big material risk and an existential risk to business, and it's worth our time and investment, and it needs help to get us to a better place. All right, it's early innings. The science isn't settled. There's some skills, job market challenges. That's a little bit dated too, and what I missed. So I'd love to know if anyone has a top 10 reasons cybersecurity is hard. If you could let me know in the chat, that'd be cool to check out. I'm going to keep moving into characteristics of the framework. It's voluntary, so it's a foundational resource that we don't have to do, right? But we would opt to do it because it's helpful. It's flexible and adaptive. So because it's voluntary, it's not something in a contract like ISO 27001, FedRAMP, SOC 2. It's something we could use with those as an overlay, and it's something we could do to have a good information security program. And it describes outcomes that we should get, and it doesn't say how to get them, but it helps us make sure we're comprehensive and focusing in the right places. Focuses on risks instead of controls, because and risk instead of compliance, because compliance isn't security. And there's a couple of there's a great discussion on Reddit here that I've linked to, and then I want to offer a really good blog post from Mark Menninger out on LinkedIn. It's an unpopular opinion. Compliance is security, right? So I'm in the compliance is not security camp, but I love his article and I love his breakdown here. And I think the bottom line is, while compliance and regulations and standards are important, our goal is to first reduce risk and foster a risk-based mindset. And then from that point, compliance will follow. All right, it facilitates communication and collaboration. I mentioned that's my favorite thing. And I'll show you how when we get into the framework core, but we've got 13 minutes left, so I've got to get there quickly. Lather, rinse, repeat, the Simply Cyber GRC mantra. Continually improving and evolving. It's a cycle. 1% better, up and to the right. And you're going to make mistakes, and it's going to be hard, but you just keep going up. Resilience is about not just protection, left of boom, but being able to quickly detect, respond, and recover. And it started in critical infrastructure. There are 16 sectors on the CISA and DHS websites, and you can see them here. And it's not just helpful for them, as we've talked about, and it's not one size fits all. So I think now I'll move to the next section. Let's talk about the framework core. I'll maybe take a quick minute and go to chat and see if there's any hot potatoes in there to talk about. Team SC, nice check-in. My sentiments exactly. All right. You do compliance to be compliant. You do compliance to build resilience, and then keep adding it to ensure full security. Yeah, like this is a nuanced conversation and a helpful one, I think. All right. So we're in part 3 now. Breaking down the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Cue the DX music to break it down. I'm not sure if that pop culture reference is going to resonate with you, but it's what I think of when I hear break it down. So we've got, this is really important, the framework core, okay? So I mentioned that all of the complexity is abstracted into 6 things. Govern, identify, protect. That's before the security incident happens. And then detect, respond, recover. Great. That's great when you're talking to executives like we saw in the picture, but it's not great when you're talking to managers, right? They need actually 22 categories. And then when you're talking to practitioners, that, the picture was in the data center, hands-on keyboard, 22 categories isn't enough. We actually need 106 subcategories. The good news is these all roll up and drill down to the appropriate level for the appropriate risk conversation. And to show you how this works, let's look at PRAA1. So identities and credentials for authorized users, services, and hardware are managed by the organization. That's the outcome we need to get. Rolling up to the subcategory, to the category, it's PRAA, Identity Management, Authentication, and Access Controls. Access to physical and logical assets is limited to authorized users, services, and hardware, and managed commensurate with the assessed risk of unauthorized access. And then that rolls up into the protect function. Safeguards to manage the organization's cybersecurity risks are used. All right, so there's 106 more examples of that, rolling up and drilling down into the wheel. All right, and Governance touches all of them. It's in the middle and related to them all. And it's a continuous process, and we never really stop identifying things, and everything keeps changing, and we keep iterating. All right, profiles. This is cool, right? So I was actually not expecting this and thought it was awesome when I learned about profiles in CSF, right? So strategy is about getting from point A to point B, where point B is advancing our goals. And so what the CSF does is it takes a baseline profile. It says, hey, here's our current state. And maybe I give myself a 1, 2, 3, 4 across all of the 22 categories. Is that where we want to be, folks, right? So put it on the page and say, now, where do we want to be? Where do we need to be given our risk profile and our threats? So we can determine then a target state. And if I fast forward a little bit, it's too far, but you'll see a spreadsheet that basically says, here's our relevant categories or subcategories. Here's our current state, desired state. Here's our gaps. And now that we've measured where we want to be to where we are, how are we going to get there? Let's get an action plan, right? And then there's a lot of project management and reporting work in GRC to help the more technical, possibly engineers and security team to do that reporting and work to advance cyber risk reduction from our vantage point in GRC. Okay. Tiers. We want to talk about what our they don't like the word maturity level, but what our tier is of capabilities. And we can look at some examples of those. Categories are listed, but I think I want to jump right to tiers. Okay. So here is an organization that is a tier 1. They're partial, okay? Overall, they have ineffective risk management methods. They're just in the early stages of cyber implementation. Maybe they're reading that SMB Quick Start Guide, right? Everything is ad hoc and reactive in nature. Usually, they have unsystematic risk management processes and unreliable programs. But you know what? Everybody starts somewhere, and we're going to meet you where you are. It's definitely not a desired state, but it's the starting point. Tier 2, to be risk informed, would be a little bit better organized. We would have informal risk methods with unfinished processes, but we're working on it, right? And they're not as bad off at tier 1, but there's still a lot of room for improvement. Then you could aspire to tier 3. And by the way, when we get to tier 3, it's not necessarily the right answer that everybody needs to get here. It's very dependent on the mission and the budget, right? And what is considered reasonable to the relevant stakeholders. But in a repeatable phase, we're more structured, and there's room for improvement, but we're doing a good job with risk management. And 3 is probably a target for a lot of organizations. We're proactive to cybersecurity, but we're not, super ahead of anticipating what's going to happen. And then adaptive, they're characterized by being proactive and innovative and adaptive to cybersecurity and risk management methods. They actively seek out emerging technologies, collaborate with industry partners, and participate in R&D to stay ahead of cyber threats. So not for everyone, but it's out there, and it's a very high bar to get to a tier 4. All right. This is the cool part I was talking about in terms of framework profiles. We want to baseline current desired state and do some scoring and rolling up and reporting on progress. Okay. And I think we got through the meat of the content. I'd be interested in any questions or feedback you might have or any more topics you want to talk about. I'm going to go over to the chat now. All right. Can change my screen here. What do we got? Any advice for transitioning military member? Great question. Try your best to be compliant. Yeah. All right. Well, listen. Advice for a transitioning military member, I'd maybe start with this daily cyber threat briefing, and there are people from the military that are there and in jaw-jacking sessions, and they can help you break in. My experience is from commercial industry, and I'm less versed in that. Oh, you know who's really good is Will Reed, the GRC mentor. Check him out, and I'd be happy to follow up with that. All right. Common pitfalls or challenges of the CSF framework practitioners usually encountered in the field. Yeah, great question. I think it's tough to tailor your baseline profile to what the business needs. And so the theme we're getting into here is that it's more your knowledge of the business and your relationships with it that are going to drive value in cyber risk reduction, more so than a specific framework, right? Like there's a lot of soft skills and there's a lot of business alignment needed to do effective work. So a pitfall might be insufficient stakeholder engagement. It might be tailoring it in the wrong direction. And, a good one would resonate with its audiences at all levels, and you would see results, right? You would see the residual risk going down over time. And I guess that's another thing. Don't just set it up and walk away. It's very helpful to get into a monthly or quarterly cadence at different levels. Like maybe it goes to your executive team quarterly, and then it goes to working committees monthly, in making it effective. So ineffective would be not doing that, right? Not putting in the work and the lather, rinse, repeat. All right, good. Some CP logging. Will the blog links be posted? Yes, they're in the YouTube description. My company runs an in-house CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development pipeline, and red team and fire team for incident response, and still have breaches a few times a year. So it definitely is a never-ending battle. Right, that's right. It's and that's acknowledged in the cybersecurity framework in focusing on cyber resilience and the emphasis. Hey, everyone, it's not just about protection. Let's talk about detect, respond, and recover. I've heard it said that security is driven by policy, and that is driven by business needs, and that is driven by the industry standards. Do you find this to be mostly true, or do you see many exceptions to the rule? Yeah, well, I think that, okay, so here's a question related to this. Should the policy triangle, like policy, standards, and directives, be a pyramid with policies at the top or policies at the bottom, right? Until I met Dr. Auger and saw his content, I would typically see policies at the top. But his point in putting it at the bottom is it's the foundation of everything. So when you say, I've heard it said that security is driven by policy, it's like expectations need to be clear on what our security policy is, and that is the foundation of everything, right? And then that needs to be appropriate for the business. So I guess if your policies are ineffective, you're going to have a weak foundation for everything else. And yeah, you're going to have no foundation. And it's going to be quicksand, and you might not have the capabilities you need. So, all elements are essential. You got to do a good job everywhere, okay? But I think that certainly they're a foundational element. All right. For beginners, how to get some hands-on experience in projects, check out Study GRC, excellent place for networking and projects and opportunities for collaboration. They direct you well. Yeah, it's probably the best resource I can think of off the hand. All right, well, it's 1:58. I think I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much, and I hope to continue the conversation at the community. And appreciate your attending, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that content. Keep the cybersecurity train going by connecting with the other Simply Cyber community resources. We have the Discord server that's lively and always keeps the conversation going. You can connect with me directly on LinkedIn. And also every single weekday morning on the Simply Cyber channel, we're doing live daily cyber threat briefings, 8 a.m. Eastern time, as well as Thursday at 4:30 p.m. We're doing live stream interviews with industry experts, and we produce videos that we push out every Wednesday morning. I'm Jerry from Simply Cyber. I hope you enjoyed the content.